much, Ms. Jia. Can you hear me fine? Great. Let me share my screen. Great. Can you see the slides?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. I do wish that maybe next year or I can make to Nairobi for this conference. So it's a pleasure to be here. So I've been asked to speak on digital trade. I understand today the session is on digital trade. But before we go into the opportunities and challenges in digital trade in the continent of Africa, I'd like to pose a question of what is digital trade? It's not a rhetorical question. I do ask folks to spend a couple of seconds to think, what does digital trade mean for you? All right, and in those couple of seconds, I would have guessed that you all came out with this different answers what digital trade is. The thing is that there's no clear definition on digital trade. Of course, there are organizations such as OECD, which we work closely with. They have a definition for digital trade and it's widely adopted, right? Which is basically means that trading of digital goods and services or physical goods and services that are digitally enabled, right? What's that mean? Let me give some examples. Digital trade could be a digital book, right? An e-book, that's digital goods, or streaming of television or movies, that's digital services. At the same time, if you purchase a physical book, say on Jumai, and it is delivered but physically, but you purchased online, that's also considered part of digital trade. Same when you book, say, I'm in San Francisco, if I book Airbnb in Kenya and stay there, that's also considered as digital trade. So as you can see, it's quite broad definition. And I would take one step further, and a lot of things that Ms. Zhang was talking about is the digitizing trade. I would put that under the bucket of digital trade as well. And it's actually a project that we lead at the forum called Trade Tech. Just like FinTech or RegTech, we call it Trade Tech. By the way, it's a hashtag, feel free to use, and let's get it trending. So Trade Tech is a set of new technologies, anywhere from 3D printing to blockchain that would enable trade to make trade more efficient and exclusive. So my point here at the start, right? What is digital trade? I like to make the argument that digital trade is the future of trade. It's more than just a subset of trade as e-commerce or whatnot. It's really digital trade is embedding every aspect of trade in today's world. Think about a part of trade without the digital technologies or a digital platform. It's really hard to find one right now. For example, if we're talking about trade financing, right? There are lots of digital technologies out there for it. If you're talking about investment, we're now talking about DFDI, digital FDI. Right? We're talking about trade facilitation. Obviously, a lot of digital technologies are employed in that as well. So just like a couple of years ago, even now we talk about the idea of digital economy. But if you really think about it, even nowadays, the idea of digital economy and economy, the concepts are merging. Which aspect of economy doesn't have a digital aspect, right? I mean, I just heard someone saying that recently, what is a car but a giant computer on 4 wheels? So same thing for trade, right? Which part of the trade that doesn't have a digital component? Right? Hard to find, right? And especially as we enter the fourth industrial revolution, where we see the fusion of physical and digital and biological, we will see more and more pervasiveness of digital technologies in every aspect of trade. So I just want to set the scene here to kind of broaden everyone's mind that digital trade is not just like a subset, right, or narrow defined aspect of trade. It's really, however you define it, you don't have to use my definition or anyone's definition, but the reality is that digital trade really is in every aspect of trade. And it will be becoming more and more so in the future. So that's helpful to kind of set the scene, right, of how we think about digital trade now, and definitely digital trade in the future. Digital trade during the COVID pandemic, absolutely being a boost for digital trade. While there are many, for example, social distancing or physical limitations, rules, digital trade, both goods and services, have kept the international trade flowing. According to UNTAD study, global e-commerce sales went up almost by 20% last year. Next statistic I found really interesting is that 1 in 3 consumers used digital payments for the first time. I think that's very, very exciting. And I read that in Africa, on the continent, Jumai, the e-commerce platform, their sales increased by 50% in the first 6 months after the pandemic. So it's absolutely being a huge, huge boost. But I think what's even more important is this culture shift, right? This mindset of digital first. The perfect example is this, right? We are conducting this conference online with speakers from all over the world. If this was 2019, right, pre-pandemic, chances are, right, not every conference, but most conferences would ask the speaker to be there in person. Right? If you cannot be there in person, they say, well, maybe next time. However, that is not normal anymore. That actually is the opposite, right? It's just expected. You probably will be remote, and if we show up in person, that's even better, right? That's what I mean. This culture shift is not just obviously the teleconferencing and speaking, but more so. For example, Michelle, we're talking about the papers, right? The amount of papers in global trade. That's a known problem for years, for decades, right? However, the culture shift of how we need the papers for X, Y, and Z reasons, then the pandemic hits, right? And those arguments don't seem very strong anymore. So I think that's I see the most important legacy during this past 2 years, this mindset and culture shift, this openness to the adoption of digital technologies. Of course, led to a lot of opportunities, but also challenges, which we can discuss more. Of course, because digital trade is such a broad definition, there are so many aspects and topics and issues of digital trade. Michelle was already mentioning data flows, cross-border data flows, extremely important topic. The G7 principles also laid out, consumer protection, open markets, etc., etc. So since I won't have, it's not a lecture, I'll have the all day. So I'll just pick. So for those issues, I think Michelle already quickly mentioned them, but I will focus on a couple of things, especially focus on opportunities, the new emergent issues. I think not many people in the digital trade space are talking about. So a couple of things, all right? So I'll talk about trade tech, which is emerging technologies for trade, digital payments. Then I'll talk about this new wave of digital trade and digital economy agreements. So trade tech, what is trade tech? I call it trade tech is a set of technologies to enable trade, to become more efficient and inclusive and equitable. So when we talk about digitizing trade, a lot of times we just automatically think, oh, all those new technologies, right? 5G, AI, blockchain, IoT, whatnot, can just come in and replace all the papers and boom, we're all set, right? It's true, I know that's a goal, but there are steps. And you can see what I say, there are 2 layers. The first layer of digitizing trade is literally the digitizing the paper, right, from the analog to digital, right, turning paper into data, into databases. That's really the first step, because without it, the new technology won't be much use, right? Once you have the data, then you can. That's the first layer. Now the second layer is that then you can apply the new technologies, right? Whether it's blockchain or AI or etc. So that's very important to keep in mind. There are two layers when it comes to trade tech, and both layers are equally important. So this is a report we published last year on trade tech. We did a survey of hundreds of companies that engage in international trade. What is the most transformative trade tech in digital trade? As you can see, IoT was ranked #1 by digital payments and e-commerce and cloud and 5G and etc. So we thought that was a really interesting observation. To me, it shows that some of the the core technologies or IoT or type of technologies, like digital payments or e-commerce, right? Somewhat basic, quote unquote basic, or ones are still very important for global trade. Whereas some of the more, I'll say, the emerging ones, 3D printing, VR, AR, in their views are ranked a bit lower in terms of transformative for trade. Maybe now, but maybe not now, but maybe for the future. This graph shows that the impact, right? Not just the most transformative, but the most impact and years to full potential. What it shows that, again, e-commerce, digital payments, cloud computing, the impact is big and is now. Where some of the other technologies, 3D printing, for example, it's a little smaller and it's a bit more in the future. We actually did another study on 3D printing, and OECD also recently published a paper on that, which backs this up. 3D printing is transformative, but it's still a small part of manufacturing, which is the impact on trade will be relatively limited. So this is an example of transformative trade tech. I also will try to run through some of the slides really quickly. The impacts of trade tech. #1, the biggest impact people found was lower trade cost and higher speed. So this is what people expected. Next two would create new products or services. I found that this one quite interesting. Basically, because of the new technologies, they may create new services that you never thought of, right? I think that's something for if you're a business entity, audience, that's something to keep an eye for. Of course, it may have positive environmental outcomes as well. Of course, not everything is rosy. Positioning of bigger companies, monopoly power is definitely a concern that folks have expressed. Some trends in trade tech. Again, I won't go through all of them. Definitely, technology can help supply chain resilience. Data sharing initiative. I know ICC will be talking about that later. Greener trade, I think sustainability, we just had the COP meeting. I think sustainability is super critical for all of us, and trade tech can definitely play a role in this. I'll skip some of the case studies. Challenges, right? Not everything is perfect. So challenges for trade tech adoption. So basically, what are the barriers? Cost is #1, right? Over 40% of companies stated that cost is a major issue, and not just the smaller companies, but bigger companies too. You would think bigger companies have more resources, which they do, but at the same time, because they have more resources, well, it costs more to revamp the entire system. So in some cases, smaller companies may be more nimble and agile. #2, lack of human capital skills. That is right after #1, so very close. I think that is a critical issue we see at a lot of places. And digital literacy, right? You may have the best technology, but can your line worker use it? Right, that's the thing, right? Do you have to retrain them? What does it take to retrain them, etc.? So that is a major issue. Some of the other ones, access and regulatory restrictions is another one. It's a major concern, especially in this day and age where there are still not very few rules out there globally and also on a regional level for digital trade. The fragmented policies, for example, on data, is a major issue and barrier for folks engaging and adopting trade tech. So next, I'd like to go through the digital payments, which is another huge opportunity. This is a joint report actually done by the Forum and the Cambridge University on fintech companies. As you can see, this is last year. The most are in blue. Blue means good. Retention of existing customer and users, 29%. So a lot of positive trends last year. So in short, more adoption and more uses of digital payments. This is the of all the fintech vehicles. You can see that some of the biggest growth: digital payments, wealth tech, digital assets exchange, 33%, which also makes sense given the craze in the past year. So that was global, right? The past two slides. Now let's zoom in Africa, in particularly sub-Saharan Africa. Again, trends are mostly positive. The reds are more in the digital lending, but in digital payments and insurtech, the numbers are quite encouraging. The retention of new customers, as you can see, it's quite high. So those are some positive impacts. Regulatory responses. I think this is what they say what they need help with, right? And you can see the largest request from innovators is faster authorization and licensing for new activities, which makes perfect sense that a lot of new activities are still being regulated under the old traditional banking law, right? Whereas fintech doesn't quite fit the circle, doesn't quite fit that square. So that's being a need. Regulatory support for eKYC, like basically creating a regulatory environment to allow eKYC and how would that work with other countries. So that's another barrier. Government intervention, what do they need from government most? Access to liquidity, tax relief, etc. So it just shows you that obviously a lot of opportunities, a lot of blue in the first couple slides, but also there's some challenges that folks need to deal with. So I talk about opportunities. We talk about digital trade. We talk about trade tech, digital payments. Then I'll touch on digital trade agreements. Then I'll close. Of course, FCFTA is being negotiated. The e-commerce protocol, I understand, is being negotiated currently and supposed to be completed by the end of the year. So very much looking forward to that. But I would actually point out a recent trend we've been observing is that in the past, I would say 2-3 years, starting with the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement among Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile, there's been a wave of digital trade or digital economy agreements, right? Usually, within a region or bilateral or among a couple parties that really focus on digital trade and digital trade issues, right? My comparison is that instead of being a chapter in a longer agreement, right, now digital trade is now the start. Instead of supporting actress, digital trade is now the start of the show. DeFi started that trend. And of course, Singapore and Australia signed a digital economy agreement, and there are more agreements that are being negotiated. There are talks about a pan-ASEAN digital trade, digital economy agreement. UK is currently negotiating several agreements, including one with Singapore. US, there are talks that support our cause for digital trade agreements between US and the Indo-Pacific, right? So there's just really, we see this trend happening, and I firmly believe we'll see more and more of those digital trade, digital economy agreements that focus really address the issues of digital trade in the next, in the years to come. What we're missing is that we don't see any from the region, from Africa yet. So I really do hope that, with the innovative economies in the region, why not? And I do hope to see more of the digital trading economy agreements from the region to really help boost the region to leapfrog, right? To not just catch up and lead the digital economy. And let me just moving to closing. As I mentioned, digital trade is the future of trade, right? Don't think of it as just one small subset of trade, but every aspect of trade has the digital component of it. And when you do so, think about beyond just trade, right? Think about the digital payment issues, why and what's the impact of that on trade. The top now talks about central bank digital currency. Think about what does that mean for trade? If you're a policymaker, what are the things you should think about? If you're a business person, what are some opportunities you can tap into, right? And lastly, we talk about technology, talk about digital, talk about this and that. But at the end of the day, always remember what's the purpose of trade, right? Trade is for people, it's to improve people's lives. Keep that in mind, and of course, and that's why digital trade is such a component and can enable for all of us for a more inclusive and equitable future in trade. So thank you very much for having me.